The content presented in this podcast is based on real events and may contain graphic descriptions of violence, sensitive topics, and explicit language that may be triggering, offensive, or sensitive subjects to some viewers and listeners. Discretion is advised. The purpose of this podcast is to explore and discuss true crime cases for entertainment and educational purposes only. This podcast does not intend to glorify or sensationalize crime, but rather aims to analyze and understand the complexities of human behavior in the criminal justice system. We encourage listeners to approach this content with empathy, critical thinking, respect for the victims and their families. The human mind has always been the most dangerous weapon. It can heal or it can destroy. It can create order or chaos. And when darkness takes hold, we turn to the ones who claim they read it, those who look into the abyss and say they understand it. What makes a monster tick? But what happens when that line between understanding evil and becoming obsessed with it begins to blur? When the pursuit of justice becomes its own twisted addiction? From Jack the Ripper's blood-soaked alleys to Ted Bundy's final moments on death row, from the Unabomber's isolated cabin to the cold algorithms of modern predictive policing, the monsters we fear and the minds that chase them aren't always as different as we'd like to believe. Now, in The Monsters We Make, author Rachel Corbett explores how criminal profiling became one of society's most seductive and quick toxic undertakings through 5 significant moments in history. So with that being said, it's time to start the show. Let's hit it. Hi, welcome to another episode of Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot. I'm your host, Winnie Schrader. With true crime obsessions and the armchair detecting on the rise, I am guilty of it myself. It got me asking what happens when the line between understanding evil and becoming obsessed with it begins to blur for me, when the pursuit of justice becomes a twisted addiction, right? So I came across this new book just released last month called The Monsters We Make: Murder, Obsession, and the Rise of Criminal Profiling by Rachel Corbett. And holy cow, what a chilling book at our obsession with the undertaking killers and the dark minds who dare to profile them. I mean, it's a dirty job, but somebody's got to do it, right? You have Hitler's profiler to the psychiatrist who claimed Ted Bundy was too sick to stand trial. Corbett exposes the thin, dangerous line between studying evil and becoming consumed by it. So I had to get Rachel on. So without further ado, I'd love to welcome Rachel to the show. Welcome to the show, Rachel.
Hey, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, your book, I was like, wow. I do understand that obsession because I get obsessed with cases because I want to understand why it happened. I just want to dig deep. I've covered a lot of cases from modern day stuff. Just a couple weeks ago, I did The Perfect Neighbor, the Netflix documentary, like what caused that whole system to just break down. And now you have a mother killed. And, but hopefully back to Jack the Ripper. Is that when did criminal profiling really start becoming part of the process of the investigation? And I guess back then they had people that were kind of sleuths themselves and would assist the police and stuff like that. But where did this all kind of start?
So it's hard to put an exact date on it, but it really started, profiling really started interacting with the criminal justice system, in the days of phrenology, when in Europe in the, I mean, 1700s, 1800s, this practice started where you could they believed you could predict someone's criminality based on the bumps of their skull, different
Mhm.
jaw shapes, nose shapes, head shapes. Um, and Cesare Lombroso, an Italian criminologist, they call him the godfather of criminology, really popularized this and wrote a book about, with photos or drawings, I should say, of all the different criminal types. Uh, and perhaps unsurprisingly, the many of the features he decided were criminal were immigrant features or the faces of people from that were considered outsiders in Europe at the time. A lot of Asian features, African features, that sort of thing. Southern Italians, because he was a Northern Italian, so they also got
Oh, I know. They had they had their tiff.
yeah, yeah. So, um, so this was, and he would testify in court cases sometimes saying,
Oh,
this
okay.
is this guy has the face of a murderer, and it would advocate for them to receive harsher sentences. Um, and then, but then leading into the Jack the Ripper era, uh, in the 1880s in Victorian London, there was what's commonly considered the first criminal profile was written at this time, by a police surgeon named Thomas Bond. And he, you know, he there had been it's been years investigating this case and could not
Mhm.
find the man. He was killing women after women after, and they they tried all sorts of things. They tried to enlist Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of Sherlock Holmes, to consult on the case. And
Mhm.
Thomas Bond, was used to looking at autopsies and forensics and giving them a report. But what he did in this case was he decided to look at some of the behavioral clues that might exist, and he thought about, well, what type of man would this be? What would his personality be like? What might he wear? And he came up with some predictions. He thought that this would have to be a very calm, collected, sort of low emotional affect person because he was killing women in the middle of the street, so that
Yeah.
somebody who wasn't fearful of getting caught.
Mm.
It was probably someone who wore dark clothes, like a cloak or a hat, because no one ever saw anyone with blood on them. So these types of things. And, he thought about the motive. A lot of times in the old days, we thought about the motive for murder would be practical gain, like for money or out of jealousy, perhaps, but not. We
Mhm.
didn't think so much about murder for the sake of it, just enjoying the practice of killing someone. So he started to think about that too, and what kinds of mental problems this person might have.
Right.
It wasn't altogether. A lot of the theories about Jack the Ripper ended up being probably not true, but
Mhm.
are very early exercise in what we now think of as criminal profiling.
Yeah, well, and also too, Jack the Ripper kinda gave up a little bit more information. He wrote letters, which is kinda stating his personality. So, it was kinda giving the investigators kind of a little bit more juice, to kind of figure out this guy. Who is this guy? What is he all about? Because it was like in all his letters, he was taunting, and it's like, "Hey, catch me if you can," type of thing, and yeah, and
Yeah,
it got that sense of him enjoying what he was doing, not just killing out of, getting money or whatever, personal gains. So, I find it interesting. I feel like that to me was kind of that turning point where the criminal profiling really started looking into the psyche of serial killer or killers and why they do what they do. And I think, and some people even say that criminal profiling is just hogwash. It doesn't mean anything. And I beg to differ. So, I think it does kind of showcase some of this stuff because profiling Jack the Ripper, I mean, it did squash them down to just, about a handful of people that probably did this. And Ethan Arthur Conan Doyle was a suspect at one point.
yeah, I know.
They thought, is he trying to write his own book? Is he like, creating these stories to write a book about it later? And so that's why I was like, oh, that's interesting. But no, so they got the Jack the Ripper, and what was kind of the next era after Jack the Ripper? And because it seems like since then it's only progressed criminal profiling. I mean, now you have college courses on it. So,
Yeah.
what's kind of the next kind of generational shift with criminal profiling after the kind of era of Jack the Ripper and stuff.
Yeah, World War II created a big shift in this because
Oh, okay.
the atrocities of the idea of profiling people based on physical characteristics became very palpable. Um,
Mhm.
you know, in Nazi Germany, obviously they looked at you had to wear a badge if you had certain characteristics, and they were looking at people's Jewish faces as somehow evidence of their, lesser status. Um,
Yep.
and that, after the war, that became very taboo to do, thankfully.
Mhm.
Um, but so they instead of profiling based on physical characteristics, they started looking at behavioral characteristics more often. Um,
Okay.
and this was um, so I look at it from the point of view of the CIA because I wanted to explore profiling in its different forms. We think of profiling as the FBI behavioral science unit mostly, the mind
Yep.
hunter,
Mindhunter, yep.
yeah, which is a chunk of the book, but I'm also looking at the way it's used all over. So the CIA, what was back then the OSS, used hired a profiler or a psychologist from Harvard to write a profile of Adolf Hitler. And this was a very early attempt to try to understand the mind of someone who they knew who he was, but they didn't have the ability to speak to him or, analyze him on the couch, that kind of thing. So it was
Yeah.
distance, like profiling when you don't know the subject. They're kind of, speculating with a lot of distance between the profiler and
Yeah.
the perpetrator. So they got this guy Henry Murray who's a fascinating character in himself because he's actually not a trained psychologist. He kind of just talked his way into the Harvard clinic. A little disturbing, but
Awesome. No, that he was the one that got Adolf. He got
yeah, I know.
He's not even
Yeah, he was not such a great guy
right.
either. But I mean, there's the line for you, like who's the criminal, who's not. In this,
Yeah.
Henry Murray, as we can talk about later, but he did a lot of very bad things in his life as well.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
but in this stage, he read Mein Kampf and looked for metaphors, and he watched all of Hitler's speeches. He even went to Germany to see him in the flesh and was really shocked at how uh, simple he looked, how not commanding, how kind of boring he spoke, and so. But he made some predictions about how he might act in the war based on his assessment of his personality, and he got a couple of things right. He predicted that Hitler would commit, for example, which
Mhm.
he of course did. And then it would it was meant to advise the intelligence agency on how to proceed with the war. Um, so that's and we still do that today. They're called political profiles or leadership profiles more often now, but the government still will profile foreign dictators or people they think are threats, Vladimir Putin, or they did one with Saddam Hussein, that kind of thing. So
Okay.
that's
Well,
the next, yeah.
yeah, I can see that, especially when it comes to politics. I could see that being as an advantage because then, especially when you're working with adversaries and things like that globally, it's almost like you kind of can predict their next move, which, that's kind of a key thing to win a war, right? Or if you're having any type of disputes with another country. So, but Adolf Hitler, to me, I feel like in his mind, he was, it's like every villain is the hero in their own story. Like in his mind, I think he really believed that he was ridding the earth of lesser than human beings and was trying to create this utopia of these genetically perfect people. And they all happen to be German, apparently. So, but yeah, talk about a madman. Like,
Yeah.
and to have that unchecked, with him being so unchecked with what he was doing, I, I'm sh- I'm I'm shocked that a lot of stuff didn't come out even at the time of his reign. I don't know if people were scared to publicly say that this guy was insane, but um, what did some of the psychiatrists, what did he kind of come up with Hitler? Like, did he say that this and this probably happened, that's why he's feeling this way and doing these things? Did he come up with any type of conclusion with Hitler?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right though, because I think that Hitler's able to do that because he really believes in this inferiority of these people, and he was able to convince. Germany to believe, to dehumanize them. And when you dehumanize a group of people, it's very easy to treat them as such. So
Yeah.
um, I think that's true. And so in the Henry Murray profile of Hitler, um, it's a pretty funny read because he spends a lot of time on his sexuality. He really, really
Really?
analyzes how. Yeah, I mean, he speculates. I mean, I'll just tell you this one thing. He says that he studied 3,000 metaphors in Mein Kampf. Henry Murray did, and he said that his conclusion drawn from them was that Hitler probably liked to have women urinate on him as part of his sexual activities, and that he probably witnessed his parents having sex, and therefore so that this was related to his dominance. Um, in life, he saw his mother as submissive, and his father was very violent, and so he learned to identify with the father's violence and strength, and hated the mother's weakness and submission.
Mhm.
And that's how he moved through life, by elevating those who he saw as powerful, and squashing everybody else. So the problem with that profile is that it's pretty bizarre and it doesn't get a lot right. This was still the 1940s.
Yeah.
The psychology was, psychoanalysis was just starting to come out, coming to America. So you have the emphasis on sexuality was huge then, and the parents, the mother. So
Yeah.
I don't think there's a really great diagnosis that we can draw from that report. I think probably there's been better research on Hitler in the years since, but it is an
Yeah.
interesting exercise. And one thing he did, I think, get right was he would talk about how Hitler would describe in others the terrible qualities that were actually part of himself. Um,
Mhm.
so it was projection, basically. So he apparently said that Jewish people would sort of fix you with their eyes and they wouldn't let you go. And it was kind of, they're penetrating you with their evil, kind of. But
Mhm.
famously, Hitler himself didn't blink and he would stare you in the eye, and it was unsettling to people. It wasn't quite a human interaction. So even little things like that he projected. Um,
Yeah. Well, he was part Jewish, so it's like,
yes,
so it's like,
yeah,
oh,
exactly.
hey, dude, I know you hate yourself, but that sounds like a you problem, you
Yeah,
know?
that's
Keep
the
it to
problem.
yourself. Yeah, and th yeah, and to know, that politically, people like that can have so much power. I wish that they would do a profile on every major politician in this country and publicly post it so we can all see it, so we know what we're getting ourselves into here. Because
Yes.
doing and saying things are completely different, and I know even with Hitler, prior to World War II, I mean, originally, when he would give speeches, it wasn't this it's like he started filtering it in slowly, and then it just kind of became part of the lexicon of all this, rounding up all the Jewish people, killing them, things like that. But it was like that's that manipulative type of sociopathic behavior where they're setting things up for you to trust them, and then they do their dirty deeds. And to me, that seems very maniacal, in
Yeah,
my opinion, and very
yeah,
evil. So I don't even know if I'd want to look in the brain of Adolf Hitler. Ugh, I wouldn't want to
yeah.
touch that with a 10-foot pole. Now, have what other big political figures, or not necessarily political, but people like on the world stage, has there been any ones where uh the profile came back and the results were shocking? Like, oh my goodness, like I had no idea type of thing.
Well, a lot of them aren't public. Um,
Okay.
they're still in the CIA. But there there's some interesting details about people's personality that you wouldn't think would be in the profile, like not about their dominance or whatever, but about their interests. And so I think it was Putin, for example, who I hope I'm getting this right. I think it was Putin, where they said he really loves this particular if you ask him about this, then he'll open up. Like he loves it. He's a very cold, stony person, but there's one subject that if you get him on, he just loosens up right away. And so, enter with that and then, try to befriend him that way. Little details like that about their personality that are more strategic in terms of how to deal with them, or things about their kids. What are their kids like? So they can ask about the kids, and have some knowledge, or what are their interests? What are the red flags? Do not talk about this issue with them, for example.
Oh,
Um,
gotcha.
yeah.
Okay, yeah, because I've always wondered that because I'm like, some of these people I see in the public eye when it comes with musicians, politicians, actors, entertainment people. I like, why are they publicly going around acting like this? And like, and people just glob onto them, and I'm like, where did this come from? Because like personality shifts. Like one perfect example is Randy Quaid. Now, Randy Quaid has been in the movies. I would love to see a profile done on him because he literally went from normal to crazy, and like thinking that people are reading his mind.
Yeah.
And, and it's like, are those triggers when there's a sudden shift in somebody's personality in life? Now, does that usually kind of fall more into the criminality of profiling? Like, are those red flags that people see, like that crossroads moment that if they went this way, it could have been a different outcome, or if they went this way?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly sounds like, I mean, I don't know the Randy Quaid situation, but it sounds there are definitely triggers, where
Mhm.
you can live your life, but then and be normal, but then a big stress happens in your life, and then it can trigger some psychiatric condition that you maybe were predisposed to. But if you're only predisposed and you never have the trigger, you may live your life without ever developing schizophrenia, say. But
Okay.
certain stresses can really bring those disorders on. And so, I mean, others are kind of grown over time. Paranoia is something that is fairly common among violent people,
Mhm.
because you feel like you're always under threat. You're always afraid, so you're very reactive to perceived threats that are not there. Um,
Yeah.
and the schizophrenia, for example, often the onset is in your early 20s. Um, and so, they've linked marijuana use now to that trigger moment. Sometimes that can trigger it if you have it, or another life event. Sometimes you'll just develop it. But I don't think necessarily having any of those conditions, of course, means you're going to be a criminal. But if you
Mhm.
have, there's usually a kind of confluence of factors that go into the sort of murderous type behavior, which is psychiatric disorders are one piece of a few, let's say.
Mhm. Yeah, because like, I've always, looked back, like, on Jeffrey Dahmer, for example. If he woulda gotten the mental care that he needed as a young man. I mean, his mother took copious amounts of psychiatric medications, which I think she had schizophrenia or something like that, while she was pregnant with Jeffrey Dahmer. And then, she was also an alcoholic, and having the life that he grew up, and then also being a homosexual on top of that, growing up in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, where was that crossroads for him? If we could have prevented that, would we be talking, would we had 1991 when they found all the bodies in his apartment in Milwaukee? So I think criminal profiling is very important because if we can detect those crossroad moments, can we prevent future atrocities from happening? And I think that's where profiling really plays a huge part and is a tool. And if you watch Mindhunter, which I have a couple times, and I've read John Douglas's book, it's not that they're trying to, they don't, you can't understand anyone's mind perfectly, but it's like it's setting up parameters so you have a better understanding of what to look for, especially in children, because a lot of times those behaviors develop at that age. Now, like with Adolf Hitler or any of these past profilers, did any of them come up with any type of trauma or anything as children that could have kind of played a part in them becoming the monsters that they were? Did they find that information out during that time, or did that aspect of profiling come a lot later?
I think that childhood trauma is almost always associated with violence, whether it's abuse or something else really terrible that happens. That's one thing that seems to be pretty stable. I think the difference is, do we study that and learn about people and then get them resources, like you're saying, to prevent that trigger or to manage it if it's already happened? And I think we need things like therapy and, support systems and, looking at families because there's so much trauma involved. A lot of times the families have problems. And so,
Mhm.
to get resources into those families before the child really goes too far. Because what's common also among a lot of these people is the Ted Bundys or is shame and really feeling made to feel humiliated as a child or lesser than, and then they compensate with narcissism, for example, or they sort of develop these um, psychopathic behaviors that protect them from feeling weak and small like maybe they once were. And then you combine that with a biological, perhaps they have a cyst in the brain or an injury that caused you to
Mhm.
lose impulse control. That's another factor. And maybe then you have developed some psychiatric disorder and all of that can trigger psychiatric disorders too. So I think
Yeah.
like the police are less interested in preventing criminality just because that's not what they do. They deal with crimes after they've happened for the most part. Of course, they want to prevent crime too, but
Yeah.
they're not looking at individuals and thinking about how to treat them because that's the
Mhm.
job of social workers and therapists and that kind of thing. So I think it would be really great if we could divert some resources there, and that while the police are using the knowledge of psychiatric research and all of that to think about criminality. That's important too, but we have to be careful not to profile children, for example, and then police them
Yeah.
extra.
Yeah, yeah, you don't wanna do that either. "Oh, we gotta keep our eye out for that one." You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, exactly.
That's where if especially if you're, even teachers. I was talking with one of my friends who's a teacher in Canada, Grace, and she reached out to me after I did the Eileen Warnos, episode last week, and she's like, "Thank you so much for talking about Eileen's past," and 'cause as a school teacher, she sees how
Mhm.
kids are being mistreated and abused and neglected. And she sees the impact and how that impact grows along with the child and how it turns them into, molds them into the person that they're going to become.
Mhm.
And I think, people in those positions, I think should be maybe even take courses in criminal profiling and things like that, just so they have an eye for it and say, I think we might need to maybe get the school psychologist in here just to kind of, check this kid out and just make sure everything's okay. Because I feel like everything constantly gets swept under the rug when it comes to that. And then all of a sudden we have this person who's mass shooting everywhere and they're like, "Well, what did he do that for?" Well, every time you look into somebody's past, there's trauma, there's a crime, there's abuse, there's drugs, there's alcohol. I mean, it's all these negative things. So it's like, what can we do to prevent those negative things creating the monsters that we have to profile? you know?
Yeah.
And hey, beautiful souls, Winnie Schrader here from Love and Lotus Tarot, your guide through the energy shifts, emotional waves, and the cosmic chaos we've all been feeling lately. I mean, let's be real for a second. The world feels loud right now, right? There's so much noise, so much tension, so much uncertainty. Between the news, social media, and just trying to keep up with life, it's easy to feel like you're stuck on this never ending roller coaster that just won't slow down. But here's the thing, even though we can't control the outside chaos, we can learn to navigate through it. And that's where I come in. I mean, lately, have you been feeling like everything is happening to you instead of for you? Are you finding it hard to stay grounded when everyone seems just as ungrounded as you are? Or maybe you've been questioning your direction, wondering if the path you are on still aligns with who you are becoming. If any of this hits home, this is for you. It's like we're all trying to move forward, but the universe keeps throwing us stupid curveballs. But here's your reminder, you are not powerless. So all you got to do is reach out and book a reading with me today so I can help you navigate through those troubled waters and gain back control of your life. You can book a reading today. Just visit me at lovelotustarot.com. Again, book a reading with me today at lovelotustarot.com. No, with Ted Bundy, though. Ted Bundy, to me, he is like, I put him and Gacy on the same level of evil because there's something not right about those guys and how callous and just cold they are about talking about it. Now, I know Ted, he said he was not guilty and stuff. Like, he tried to defend himself in court.
Back.
Gacy, I mean, like, he just like, yeah, I did it, eventually. Yeah, but how cold, and when they talk about those crimes, there was no emotion in their voice either. Um, Now with criminal profiling, how can they discern how much of like this sociopathic behaviors and psychopathic behaviors and the evil side of them, how much can they tell, like, it's more the sociopath causing the murder, or is it something else within this person causing it, and the sociopath is the one side of them is, like, the one saying, "You need to do it, you need to do it, you need to do it." You know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah, well, I think, when you look at how they do it, are they doing it for pleasure? I mean, are they doing it really sadistically? Um,
Okay.
Obviously, you don't have empathy if you're sociopathic. So
Yeah.
that's we couldn't kill in the first place. I couldn't,
No, I
but
couldn't
it would
either.
but it would so if you're getting pleasure out of it, not only do you not care, you're actually, really sadistic. And then, after the fact, so of course in interviews they're like, yeah, whatever. Like, I don't care.
Mhm.
You don't care. They really don't. And there's usually kind of both of them are very narcissistic people
Yeah.
on top of it. So they feel they're actually superior to their victims, and they enjoy expressing that by belittling them in the most horrific ways possible.
So weird. Now people like that, like Bundy and Gacy. Is there any way to get through to those kind of people? Like, I mean, or are they just kind of that's just who they are now, and they have to be put to death or put in prison for life because they're just gonna continue to do it. There's no hope for rehabilitation. There's no hope of rewiring the thinking process in 'em. That's just who they are now.
I mean,
And Eileen even said, she goes, "If I get out, I'm gonna kill again." Because she's like,
okay.
the switch was flipped and it's on now. So,
Yeah. I mean, my understanding is that these people are almost impossible to treat. Like sociopath, they just don't know how yet. They don't know how to. It's something that, and when you don't have empathy, you don't likely take well to therapy if you're narcissistic, because you think you're better than it. You don't care. It doesn't
yeah.
interest you. You don't care about developing empathy when you don't have it. You think it's a weakness, perhaps. So they're very hard to treat. I mean, do you put them to death? I guess it depends on your view of the death penalty, or into a psychiatric hospital. Certainly, they need to be taken out of society because they probably will kill again, And they also don't have that kind of fear sometimes. Some of them, the fear of getting caught in the same way. Maybe that's they don't have that anxiety, or the part of your brain that makes you
Yeah, it
stop
makes
doing
you
things that are at
yeah.
risk, risky. Yeah.
Yeah, it's either fight or flight type of, like, "Do I leave? What do I
Mhm.
do?" Yeah, and that's like a normal person's response. But yeah, I mean, like these serial killers, some of 'em, they're just so cold and calculated, and when they get caught, they're just like, "Oh, you finally got me." I mean, it's like they're not remorseful. They're like, "Yep, it is what it is now. They finally got,"
Yeah.
and they just kind of, it's like duck off a water off a duck's back. I mean, they just let it roll off. Sometimes they fight in court. I know Ted Bundy did, and there's been a lot of other serial killers that constantly go through appeals and appeals and appeals, appeals. But it's like,
Mhm.
no, you're guilty, guilty, guilty. You just need to stay, stay, stay.
Yeah.
Um, but what was like some of the ones in your book? What was kind of your favorite or most interesting case that you kinda did some research on, and you really kind of blown away with the results of the profile and how it matched up with the actual events that had happened.
Well, I think, um, I think this is tricky because I think that criminal profiling, I think that it's really important that detectives understand psychology to some degree and are versed in the research. But in 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 terms of applying the criminal profile in order to catch a perpetrator, it hasn't been that effective. It's
Mhm.
more like it's a really useful tool and a knowledge base, but in solving crimes, it doesn't have a very good statistical success rate. Um, there was actually one study in England some years ago that put it at 2.7% of times the profile led to the capture or the
Oh,
identification of the
wow.
suspect.
That low.
Um, which is not to say it's useless. I mean, all this
Yeah.
information is super important, but it's really like sort of one tool among many. But the one to one, does it catch the guy, is pretty low. Um, so the characters that I discussed in the book really weren't caught by profiles. Um, but when you look back, you can see how things sort of fit together. I think Ted Kaczynski is a really interesting case because um, he was someone who I can sort of I imagine that trigger going off. He was the psychologist I was talking about earlier from Harvard, who wrote the profile of Hitler. When he came back to Harvard after the war, he started experimenting on his students. And one of the undergraduates at Harvard was Ted Kaczynski. And so
Oh,
Ted Kaczynski went through several years of experiments under Henry Murray. And the experiments were humiliation based. So they were designed to see how you could break down a person's personality through humiliation. And
okay.
Henry Murray said this was an attempt to then rebuild them into more kind of model citizens. But he only got to the breaking down part. He never rebuilt the people he tested on. So um, Ted Kaczynski was only 17 at the time. He was this prodigy student there, and he was the only sort of working class student there. He was already really alienated and an outsider at Harvard. And then he would write these essays, and then a law student would come in and tear them apart and call him stupid and tell him how all his ideas were wrong and criticize how he looked, tell him couldn't grow a beard or whatever, kind of emasculating him.
Yeah.
And this went on for years, and it was during this time that Kaczynski started to develop revenge fantasies and started thinking about leaving society and moving into the woods. Um, I don't think that's the only thing that made him the Unabomber, but it's hard to think that doesn't play a role, or that might set something off in the brain that he was predisposed to. He
Yeah.
was diagnosed later with paranoid schizophrenia. Um, could be that's the case. And then, when he started bombing people, psychologists were among the people he targeted. So it makes you wonder if he really was so upset by what happened there, it influenced his attacks later in life.
Yeah. Well, and he was, even though by his criminal profiling, they even think that he could have been possibly a suspect in the Tylenol murders based off of
Mhm.
his criminal profile because he was in the area at that time in Chicago during the it was early 80s it happened. I believe 81. Um, but based off of his profile, they think, he may fit the bill for being the tunnel runner because they've never really pinned it down to anybody either, for sure.
Yeah.
So I could see how criminal profiling too can also help kind of connect different cases. And maybe it even helps create the patterns of acknowledging serial killers. Like, okay, this seems like it's being done by the same person, not just the physical, but just the way it was done, the way the demeanor of the body was, things like that. I think maybe criminal profiling really helped kind of lump cases together too. Because back then, when you didn't have the technology we have today with databases and things like that, you could have 10 girls being murdered by the same person in 4 different states, but they're not gonna connect the 2 or all
Right.
the murders
Right.
together. So I think maybe, yeah, like criminal profiling, that's kind of like the glue to kinda help piece some of this stuff together for, like the FBI, CIA, and police and investigators.
Yeah.
But yeah, Ted Kaczynski, he was kind of a weird duck. He was so against technology. He just wanted to live off the grid. Okay, then just go live off the grid. You don't need to blow things up, dude. But yeah, he was another one that that anger and revenge that he needed to get. Um, Now, have there been any type of modern day ones that you would like to have to look into their case? Like me, I would love to look at Brian Kohlberger's criminal profile because it's funny. It's very funny because I don't know if you're a Dexter fan, but literally season 8 of Dexter was Brian Kohlberger's life, and it's funny because he was a student of Kathleen. Is it Kathleen or Catherine Ramsland?
Uh-huh.
And she's a huge forensic psychologist. And that was the plot of season 8 of Dexter. And he studied under her, and then he developed this need to kill. So he was like doing. That's what I've always wondered by profiling. Put these key things out. Is it teaching serial killers to not show
Not get
these
caught.
crimes? Because I'm
Yeah.
like, is that why Brian Kohlberger took this class so he can be a smart killer and figure it out so he can make the distractions and the smoke and mirror type effect when he commits these crimes, which he completely flubbed and flopped, and that's
Yeah,
what
she didn't do a very good job if that was the case.
no, he did not. He completely just and that I think that's part of his ego by not his terms of pleading guilty that he never has to reveal why he did it.
Mhm.
And I think he's ashamed that he's a failed serial killer, in my opinion. Thank God he was a failed one, but I think that was kind of another works, something in the works, getting
That's
molded and ready to come out.
That's so interesting to me that plea, like when he, because this tells you he knows that people are so obsessed with true crime and getting into the minds of murderers that like the meanest thing he could do is just say, "No, I'm not going to tell you."
Right.
It's just refusing. I mean, I don't know. It could be also because he doesn't want to talk about his bad crime, but I
Yeah.
think it's also, like, it's depriving people of that explanation or even the apology that sometimes you get, after criminals make. He's just like, "Nope, I'm gonna leave you with that," and it's
And
very
see,
frustrating.
I know, and, like so I'm trying to rationalize it, so my brain's looking for patterns, and I started seeing patterns with the date and the address of the house because everyone's like, "Why did he pick this house?" "Why these kids?"
Yeah.
And then I'm like, of course, my brain going down the criminal profiling line, a lot of times serial killers like to have a moniker. They like to have a calling card. They like to, when a murder happens, they want people to know it was them without knowing it was them.
Mhm.
So I was looking at the date, which matched the house address, which also matched how many people were in the house that were killed and how many people were left alive and killed. So I was like, is he like becoming like the sequence killer or something? Like, is he using numbers like the random address killer and date? So I totally understand how criminal profiling can be obsessive because we want to know the answers. We want to rationalize chaos. We want to rationalize why something so horrific happened. It's, rubbernecking when you see somebody rear-ended on the side of the road. It's nothing really to look at, but you can't help but you gotta look at it, and I kind of feel like that's kind of with criminal profiling. But me, I like to get to understand, which I do get in trouble because I have a tendency to empathize and sympathize with some of these murderers,
Uh,
but I sympathize and empathize the person that they could have become.
mhm.
That's where my loyalty lies. What could they, have been like if these things didn't happen or if somebody intervened?
Or
And
the child they were before this.
yeah, yeah, I mean, there's so many things, in every case that you look at, there's so many social, like, like Jeffrey Dahmer, and there's a lot of other ones too, like being a homosexual man in a Midwest town in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, you're ostracized just that alone.
Mhm.
So, I could see how society can play a part in creating these monsters as well, ignoring abuse, like Eileen Warnos.
Mhm.
The teachers would complain that she would smell because no one would bathe her. Like, then why aren't you doing something about it?
Yeah, I know, it's horrible.
You know something's going on. So I don't know. Maybe Hitler wasn't hugged enough by his mom. You had Ted Bundy. I don't even know where he got his depravity from and his weird. He Ted Bundy to me is just nasty human being. He just is. I can't empathize or sympathize with him at all.
Well,
I
he didn't
can't.
talk
But
about his childhood either, so we don't really know what happened to him, and he
the
pretended it
the
was all
on
fine and good.
the only thing I've heard about Ted Bundy is that technically he had kind of a normal childhood. Now, growing up in the 40s and 50s, fathers were strict. There was a lot of, especially religious, played a huge part in moral standing within society. You went to church, you did right, you didn't commit crime, you were just a pleasant person to be around. But the only thing I heard about Ted, and my husband did an interview on this a long time ago because they think baby Ted might have had a little bit of evil in him because, like, I guess when he was young, his mother or aunt woke up and he was just standing next to her at the bed with like a big cleaver knife or something in his hand, just staring at her for no reason.
I've heard that too,
Um,
yeah.
and then during one of his trials, he was in the courtroom and it looked like his eyes like kind of blackened out and there was this sulfur smell
Hmm.
around him, but, like, the lawyers and people in the courtroom were complaining about it. So it's like, I don't know, he there's something off about that guy that I don't even wanna touch with a 10-foot pole. But yeah, I think Brian Kohlberger would be a really good one to really look into today because it seems like that's kind of the biggest one that stands out that has those unknown answers. Now, is there any case that you would like to see done that hasn't, specifically, like, one that you're interested in?
I mean, Kohberger is definitely fascinating, and, like Ted Bundy, Bundy worked at a rape victims hotline.
I know.
So, like, getting a little too close to the and studied law, you have to wonder, was he studying law to be able to get out of his own defense? So I think Kohberger is very interesting also, like you. Um, I'm also, I live in New York, and so I'm very fascinated with the, Long Island serial killer case or the
Yes.
Pillow Beach murder, his
Mhm.
different names, because he was just caught
Yes.
year and a half ago, um, and remember living here as those murders were happening and being palpably afraid of this thing. I don't living nearby this active serial killer. That was a really wild thing. And I was reading the stories in New York Magazine, like this is terrible, and they kept happening, and they've been going on for years. And he's another one of these guys who he's an architect. He presents as very normal. He held down a job. He has a wife and kids. All of that. He works in Manhattan at the Department of Buildings. It's just
I know, it's like, what the heck? And that's how Gacy was. They're hidden in plain sight.
yeah,
Yeah, they just have these normal lives, and thank God, I believe it was, I'm trying to remember the girl's name. I think her name was Shannon. She was the girl that kinda, missing girl that kinda kicked everything off because her mom was not gonna give
Hale
up.
Gilbert. Yeah,
Yeah, Shannon Gilbert, that's what it was.
yeah,
And, yeah, her mom wasn't giving up, and it's weird because I believe Shannon was actually the last one found. But
yeah,
when they went to go searching for Shannon, they found another woman, and then they found another woman, and then they found so it's like, thank God that mother didn't give up. I don't think we woulda caught the guy, if it wasn't for her. She
yeah.
spearheaded that thing, and she pushed, 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 "We gotta get this guy, we gotta," and thank God. But, yeah, he would be an interesting one too because he was just very boisterous, funny. People liked him in his office. His
Mm,
wife felt like he's like, "He couldn't have done this," and it's like, "Oh, well, I think he did. I don't think you know your husband as well as you think you do." And Gacy was the same way. So, I
yeah.
could see those 2 being very similar, but yeah, he would be an interesting one too. But thank you so much, Rachel, for coming on today and discussing your book. Again, it's The Monsters We Make, Murder Obsession, and the Rise of Criminal Profiling. There will be a link for that in today's show notes. So please check it out, rate and review the book. Now, is there a website or anything that people can find more of your books or works or any type of journalism that you do?
Yeah, I'm at Rachel, Rachel dash Corbett.com. And social media, I'm on Rachel N. Corbett.
Perfect. And I'll have a link for all that in today's show notes as well. Well, thank you so much, Rachel, for coming on. Yeah, isn't that a great topic to talk about? And to know that criminal profiling is not just a new thing. It just didn't happen with John Douglas and the FBI. uh, criminal profiling and, Mindhunter and all that stuff. It went far beyond that, but with psychology where it's at today and the tools that we have at our belts, I think it's really good that we have these things and continue to use them. And I think maybe just personality profiling where it comes to children, workplace environments, things like that. Find it to be very beneficial just to kind of get a personality trait of all these people that you're coming in contact with on a day-to-day basis. You always wonder what's going on in, Bob's head that's working over in the HR department, right? I wanted to address, some of these cases that I have been talking about lately, and I am going to cover Dahmer. I did a show, one of my first shows I did, which I will put a link for that, and I'll have it at the end of this episode. I think you guys should check it out. It's called Frustrated Witness, and it talks about possibly Jeffrey Dahmer being the person that kidnapped and murdered Adam Walsh. If you don't know who Adam Walsh, John Walsh from America's Most Wanted. His son was murdered. That's why John was a spearhead for the Missing Exploited Children's Foundation. Because of the death of his son, he created a career out of catching fugitives and criminals and serial killers. But knowing some of the traits that in that book and what we talk about, just hearing what some of the witnesses described this gentleman that was at the Sears mall that day, it fits Jeffrey Dahmer to a T. Even just the way his demeanor was approaching people. So that's part of criminal profiling too. So it has a lot of distinctive features, and it has a ton of faults too. You can't have lump all these people into one category. There's so many tangents that can happen. But like with Eileen Wuornos, I've been getting some comments saying, "Well, she was crazy. She murdered these men." Well, of course she did, but why did she do it? Because a normal person, even normal prostitutes that go out on a day-to-day basis, walking the streets and encountering men all the time, they don't kill. But did they have a past like Eileen? Were they abused? Were they neglected? Were they basically their body was currency to other people and they were treated as lesser than? Those things do play a part in how a person is molded and who they become as an adult and how they're going to function in society. When I empathize with people like this and sympathize, it's not because I'm saying that they don't deserve what they got. Many people deserve to be in prison. They screwed up. But what can we do to prevent from people having to get to that point? That's my goal. And talking about these kinds of cases really showcases those crossroads that I've talked about. When you have two people that have the same set of circumstances in life, but one person becomes a mass murderer and the other one becomes, Gary at State Farm, the top insurance agent, salesman for the month. What triggers a person to go one way or the other? That's where we need to figure out and how we can address it to the point where it doesn't boil over to somebody losing their life. Because that's what the whole thing of this is about, is to prevent death from happening. It's not that I say Eileen was innocent, that she didn't deserve what she got. I don't think she deserved to be put to death. I think she would have benefited from having being in like an institution or even just in prison. But in the episode, I also said I think prison was the best place for her. And here is why: it had structure. She felt secure and safe there. I mean, not with the law enforcement. She felt like they were trying to mind control her, but having that structured life, knowing where your food you're going to get fed every day, where you're sleeping every night. And she probably created friendships. I think that that's what Eileen deserved to have from the get-go when she was born. I think they could have benefited from trying to learn how to be a real human being and how we're supposed to be versus what they were made into. And it's giving them a chance to at least have some sense of love and compassion and empathy for other people other than themselves. And that's part of the human experience. We're all in this together. So let's try and keep it that way and uplift people. And when you see something bad, say something. Don't let people get away with it. I've even done that where I felt the kid was being treated at home, and I did say something. Come to find out, that kid was very neglected and abused at home, and I felt a lot of people think, oh, it's not your place to do that. Well, it is my place, because that person eventually is going to grow up and could show up at my front door with a gun. So you got to give people a chance to enjoy the human experience. But when it's taken away from you from the get-go, they always say, well, Eileen or they all know it. They know what they're doing is wrong. Well, of course they do, but that's because that's all they've been taught their whole lives is what's wrong. And they don't have a discernment to say, this is wrong. I shouldn't be doing this, because everything that's been done to them has been wrong as well. So please take those into considerations when I do episodes like this, just to say, think outside the box, put yourself in their shoes, like I did with Eileen, because I have been in a very abusive situation in a relationship. When I was in high school, I was sexually assaulted. I was physically assaulted. I was mentally abused. And I got to the point where I felt like a caged animal, and at any moment I could snap myself. That's how terrified I felt. Luckily, it didn't get to the point. Like I said, I wanted it to. There was times I could have just, but I chose not to, because I was also brought up in a house where family, morals, love, compassion, empathy were a thing. I had my family. I had something that could keep me grounded and keep me on the right path. But when you're a child and you don't have any of that, what are you supposed to do? And do we just cast these people aside and just kill them and say, well, tough luck, kid? We can't be doing that either. Come on. We're Americans. We're human beings. Let's flip the script on this and figure out what we can do to create a better society for us all. Thank you guys so much, and I hope to see you all next week. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot. And until our next case, my armchair detectives, stay safe, stay vigilant, and stay aware. I'll see you right here next week on Mysteries, Mayhem, and Merlot.